Hi, welcome and namaste to the Yoga Out of the Box podcast. My name is Marvin, and on this podcast, we try to free yoga from all its cliches to make it more accessible and establish it more as a kind of modern lifestyle, reachable for everyone. And to do so, we want to educate yoga teacher. We want to help everyone to integrate yoga into their lives. And that's why we have each week a new super interesting conversation with an expert out of different fields, from yoga teachers, practitioners, movement coaches, different styles of movement, health in general, breath work, ice bathing, you name it, meditation, of course. So all of the good stuff you will find here. This week we had a super nice conversation with Miles Mortons, who's I would say pretty famous yoga teacher now from the UK, from London. He's teaching all over the globe. He's known for his I would say super dynamic vinyasa style. He's teaching rocket as well, and great handstand and arm balance guy. So I think all of us can learn a lot from him. It was a super nice and humble conversation, and thanks so much for having me. And without further ado, right into this episode. Enjoy. Hey Mouse, how are you?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Mouse, for the audience who may not already know you, could you shortly introduce yourself and give us a kind of backstory?
So my name is Miles. I'm Australian. I was born and raised there, but my mum is English. And so I moved over to London, where I'm currently based now, about 11 years ago in 2013. I originally moved over to study music and pursue a career in DJing, music production, and then found my way into the yoga and gymnastics hand balancing world.
That's a super interesting kickoff for that episode, I think. So how do you first get in touch with yoga, and how did you get hooked to really get into your practice?
So yoga was always a dominant figure in my life. My mom was a teacher, and so it was always around. Definitely practiced a little bit as a kid when I was growing up, but I wouldn't say
Interesting.
I had a yoga practice. But coming to yoga was a very natural thing for me when it happened, but it didn't happen until I was probably about 5 years after living in London. My decision to start practicing yoga was actually born out of, I guess, a heavy time in my life where I was dealing with borderline somewhat into body image issues and eating issues.
Oh, wow.
And then there was also slight bouts of depressiveness. I wouldn't say I was depressed because I never got clinically diagnosed, so to say, but it was definitely moments of if this was depression, this is what I would feel that it was. And I never grew up in a house that was kind of say, we had was more into alternative healing avenues. And so I knew very quickly I didn't want to go onto antidepressants or anything like that. So started seeking avenues of meditation, which eventually fed into exploring yoga. And to be honest, when I started, it was rolling my mat in the room and just doing what I knew from classes that I took with my mom at 14 years old, 12 years old or something. So there was no sense to it. The practice when I first began was definitely, I guess, a toxic place, but also a healing place. So a lot of it took me many, many years to find peace with it, because a lot of the time I would practice out of the healing components it gave me, but also of the, I guess, demon side of it in my head, where it's okay, you have to practice because you've eaten or done this today. There was a dark side to it as well. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey of yoga for me.
Definitely. I think even how you describe it, I think when I talk nowadays to a lot of yoga teachers or people practicing yoga for a while, they're from the physical aspect coming and drawn to yoga, or they are from the mental part mostly. And what I find really interesting is that in both ways, even if you have issues in your body, or you have maybe you said kind of slightly depressive episodes, even practicing yoga in a daily routine can become a kind of coping mechanism, right?
Yeah. Well, it's for me, it's really about it gives you the tools on how to live. And
Mm.
I love the wording that yoga is a preparation for life and it's a preparation for death. And it teaches you how to live within this life. And it's a systematic approach to curating happiness and existence as well as for whatever comes next. And I do believe it is a medicine. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a healing property that doesn't mean you necessarily have to have things going on. You know, those healing medicinal properties can be about even deepening that loving, nurturing qualities towards yourself. And, you know, as they say, pursuing your dharma and your duties and fulfilling that path and creating that, you know, celebration of who you are in this path and in this lifestyle.
Yeah, I think I always use like the picture of a kind of toolbox, that what we do like on the mat is just like one part of a lot of different kind of tools we can use in our day-to-day life.
For
And I
sure.
think this is so much more important if you can integrate it in your day-to-day life. So asking that, how does your practice changed over the time? So when you first started out, it was just like from what you thought or what you learned from your mom. How did you get deeper into it?
I think my practice has changed over time in that definitely when I started out, I was way more gun ho into yoga. And what I mean by that is I was always doing asana. And I was meditating every day and doing a lot of those practices as well. And now my yogic practice, in terms of the physical format, is a lot of different things. And in terms of gymnastic strength training, in love with hand balancing and exploring contortion at the moment, which is really interesting for me. And the practice really has formed more into how I'm living my life, how I'm showing up for myself, the relationship that I have with my partner, how we're coming together, building and unraveling also, how am I teaching people, how am I like, what are the spaces I'm curating, whether that's on a retreat or in a training intensive. And so, you know, it's always interesting when people are like, oh, well, that's not, you know, the physical stuff outside of asana strictly is not yoga. And for me, I mean, a lot of people say it, but it's like yoga it's, you know, if you want to do real OG yoga, it's like go live in a forest and take a vow of silence or hold your hand above your head, you know, do fasting. And it's like the yoga really is the intention behind your movement and how you're doing it. You know, it means connection. So it's like how you connecting to breath, to mind, to body, to spirit, to Ishvara, divinity. And whatever the way that gets expressed really is how it, you know, that's the practice. And so for me, my practice has turned way more into, you know, how am I interacting with diet? How am I interacting with myself, my mind? How am I interacting with the world? What are the conversations I'm having? And I guess the consciousness and the mindfulness behind that into, you know, living in line with those yogic philosophies and also interpreting them into a way that challenges you, but integrates into your life, I guess.
I love that part for sure. Yeah, I think even nowadays you have like a lot of different stuff going on all the time around you, right? And I think when people talk about like yoga and traditional yoga, I just had like a conversation where we both agreed that it sometimes is just like a kind of, again, you're putting something into a box while
Mm,
your yoga practice can be really everything. And in the end, none of us is now living in a cave in India, right? Or is
exactly.
like, apart from everyone else. So in the end, we have to like make the most out of it. And I think, like you said, not just seeing the physical part on the mat, like just as your yoga. I talked to a friend, he is physiotherapist, and he is like practicing such a lot of crazy stuff as well
Mm,
in arm balances, he's bouldering, he's like doing triathlons. And he's like, yeah, but if I find this moment of like unity, just me and my mind and the world, this is for me like the most yogic part ever.
yeah. And it's that flow state, you know, it's complete. And in many ways, I believe somewhat that that is samadhi because samadhi is absorption, right?
Yeah.
So when you achieve deep flow state, when there's no separation between yourself, whatever it is that you're doing, and the breath and the world around you, really, that is, samahdi, that is the absorption. And I think there's different layers into that, because samadhi can be, the meditation of complete dissolvement of ego, of identity, the renunciation of whatever and everything, to completely devote your life and hit those transcendental states in meditation. And equally, it can be in the household a manner of, especially in, like, say, for example, long distance runners, like in the ultramarathon world, the states that they go into, it's like hallucinogenic psychedelic states. And that is complete absorption and dissolvement of self. You are no longer ego, you're no longer yourself, you are just a body that's running along. And I think that's so achieved in yoga as well, or weightlifting, or whatever it is. It's like, it's the dissolvement of, essentially, to unify with Vishnu, which God or divinity or cosmic energy, whatever it is that you want to call it. And I think there's so many layers of which we can experience that, and yet the human nature loves black and white and to put it into boxes. And it's not that simple, and everything is subjective, right? So the way we define something is going to be so different. So then I really believe it's the yogic's duty to, I always say it's to become the observer of our story rather than the participant. So what am I seeing that's not allowed me to see?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the flow state and what we can achieve in so many different ways is magical. And really, that is the biggest part of yoga, of that awakening of prana, the electricity to drop in. But yeah.
So here, do you believe definitely in samadhi and that it's reachable in this lifetime?
I think so. Like, I read a book, a very dear friend gave me a book called The Inner Traditions of Yoga by Michael, I want to say Freestone, but I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it is.
I will Google it and link it below in the episode description to make sure.
But that was a book that I was like, changed the way I thought about the old, let's say, rules, or the old teachings. Is like how, he was an Ashtanga practitioner and spent time with Darby Joyce and kind of that old lineage, and the way he writes is beautiful, and how he interprets some what drishti is in our lives, and the yamas, and how that affects into how every day it's so beautifully written. And that was a book that really made me be like, it can change the way I saw the 8 limbs, so to say.
Super interesting. I even think, like, when we talk about like this kind of modern approach, or this kind of like adapting yoga to a modern kind of lifestyle, even it's always like, even nowadays in times of social media, like you said, the human loves like black and white. So we are always, get pushed into one or the other direction, and we get shown that tradition has to be exactly like this. And when we talk about styles like Ashtanga, I was practicing Ashtanga, or I'm practicing Ashtanga, but my teacher was he was as well like practicing with Darby Joyce, and he was saying in the first days it was like exploration. It was a center of like research. It was not the yoga shala and this is coming from the tradition. No, it's changed over time, and it was like exploring how this works. And I think even nowadays we always try to, it's human, we try to find this one solution which is like fitting all over the time. But I think we have always to adapt and to modify. And even nowadays, for example, like pulling exercises, or like even muscle building exercises, are like supernatural, or like super healthy for us. Why shouldn't we like ignore them? Or like you said, if you have the opportunity to get once like to an ultra marathon and you want to reach this kind of state, come on, this experience is here to be lived, right?
Exactly. And I think when I went to India, you're like, I was in Mysore for a bit, and I didn't go to practice with Shirath. I went to a different school, but they called it the Yoga Research Institute, and a lot of places there are called Yoga Research. And it's, I think people really like to be like, this is the way, and this is the way it needs to be done. And not to criticize Ashtanga, goes into other lineages as well, but it's really like, oh, this is what the teacher says, so this is how it's supposed to be done. It's like, okay, but why? What's the reasoning? And that's, what doesn't change dies. And this is what served people at this time, and that's going to change. And what I always explain in my teacher trainings to people is like, you got to look at the context of which this has come from, right? Like, one, it was designed for young Indian males who have a completely different genetic structure to white Westerners. It's a different temperature. Most of the time it's 34 degrees or whatever it is, heat. And, it's completely different body types. Bringing a practice like Ashtanga over to a Western body, some bodies are designed for it, but you're also taking a body that, for example, my heritage, like way down the line, is Nordic, like Scandinavian. And what I found out is like Scandinavians have a lot more power. Like there's a lot more strength in their genetic makeup versus elasticity in their proteins. And, when I came to practice, my body was way stronger than it was flexible, and I had to work my ass off to get flexible. But it is that, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, how do you experience an ancient practice in a modern day context, and how does that evolve for you? And also, how can you, what's interesting is people like, well, that's not yoga. Like when I was in Mysore, my Ashtanga teacher, he was doing chin-ups, pull-ups, he was doing like weighted stretching, all of these things to have a healthy and fit body and mind. It's like the whole thing, in the Ashtanga Yoga Shala, there was like a little home gym set up. So it's just funny that we can get so tied into like, this is the way that it has to be done, versus like, let's just explore and see what happens.
Just a short break. Guys, if you haven't yet, please consider to follow this podcast on Spotify, on YouTube, on Instagram. Leave a good review, comment below this episode. What are your thoughts? This really, really helps us out. This podcast is completely free. We don't earn any money from Spotify, so it would be great if you could help us out. Do your karma yoga, guys, and back to the episode with Miles. Yeah, I think even like you said before, by defining something, you already create like a kind of like, border between me and you, and like making your own definition is always subjective, and I think it's so interesting when you say you like research your heritage, and if we have these opportunities nowadays and go into, okay, what are like things I'm maybe easy in doing, what is like stuff I'm pretty good in, and on the other hand, okay, where I have to work on, what are my weak points, and to balance this out is like, I think even in a modern yoga practice, much more important than just like following up a strict kind of rule, which is just, which should work for everyone. This is most of the time. Even the classes, I think in London it's the same like in Germany or like in Spain where I'm teaching. I think, the body types and the people coming to classes are not all the same, right?
Yeah.
And mostly different than in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, in London, it's such an eclectic bunch, when you get it in the room, which is amazing, and everybody, you get full die-hard yogi practitioners that's all they do, and you got other people that, doing gym work, and yoga is just like a really enjoyable thing they do on the side. And one thing in London is like, it is a very strong practice here as well. And in a lot of the classes, like, you have a handstand is quite a casual thing, which is wild. But yeah, it's you're always dealing with different bodies, and I think the skill of the teacher is to, have the humility to question, to admit perhaps they don't know, and to work it out with the student, to be like, okay, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but like, let's play and see. And I was in a fellow teacher and friends training the other weekend on contortion and backbending. And she, one thing I very much respected is like in front of the class, she was like, sometimes it's like I have no clue what to do. And it's when I'm working with a private client and it's just figuring out, right? Because especially in private client work, you might have someone who's super flexible and it's very easy, or they're malleable or very strong. So handstands, whatever. Other times, there's limitations, injuries, whether that's in public or private classes. It's like you have to, you're a problem solver. You got to think critically. And I do believe that the better diversity of knowledge that you have, the better artillery you have to solve the problem, right? Like if you've restricted your whole learning just to one methodology of physical practice, problem solving, injuries, or overcoming limitations, you're going to be very limited to your answers. Where if you have explored other things and interwoven them to build a practice and help people avoid injury or overcome fears or whatever it is, you're better equipped to face a challenge. It's kind of like, asking a chef to cook a meal with one knife versus a whole kitchen. I think it's like, how well can you arm yourself to really work with things?
No, for sure. I think these situations can be like even quite challenging. I think maybe every yoga teacher had this situation where you have like a full class and you have like this super hardcore yoga students, which are maybe even like more flexible, more strong in some poses like you are. Everybody had this situation. And on the other hand, you have somebody who just starting out. So I think it's like even, there it's much more important to get this practice outside the mat to be, to realize, okay, I can't handle all of this at the same time, but that's fine. It will work anyways.
Yeah. I think that's one of the best things I learned early on is you can't make everyone happy, and you have to teach to majority of them, right? So it's if you're in a vinyasa class and you have someone come in who's very strong, like they have a very high level practice, and then you have 80% of the rest of the room is like still working with fundamental arm balances or whatever it is. It's like you can't teach a super hard class just because of them. But then equally, if you have, say, a regular slot, and I sometimes have this, I teach this Friday morning class, and it's like the same people every week. They're, killer,
they know you, they
super
know your
strong.
style.
Yeah. And then every now and then you'll get someone that's just rolling in, but it's like, you got to teach to the people that are there. And I feel sometimes when people go into that, they'll over coddle the beginner or the person who's not advanced. And it's like, you just got to give them little successes, nice little adjustments. It's like, make them feel good, but it's not your role either to please everybody in the room. It's like, you will have people walk out of your classes. You will have people yell at you, write bad reviews about you. It's like, you're not supposed to be everyone's cup of tea. Yeah, but it's definitely challenging when you have that. Like I remember in the early days of teaching, and you're just like, I don't know what to do here. Like, how do I deal with this? Especially if you got like 20 people there, and it's like, what do I do? It's a learning process.
Thanks for mentioning that, because I think it's even for beginner yoga teachers or people just getting into the field of yoga, maybe even practitioners starting out in classes and looking around. It's kind of humbling seeing somebody like you, for example, who's already quite famous in the yoga space, I would say, and to say, okay, this is a normal kind of situation. Everybody has to face this, and everybody has to go through this. I mean, I was like in the beginning as well, like struggling. I was always thinking, oh, maybe I teach. My favorite was teaching private classes or private clients, because I was like, okay, you can work more in detail with them. And if you have always beginners running into a class and you want to teach something more advanced, it's like, starting off from zero. But you're right. In the end, even like, I think if people first time joining a class, sometimes, this can give them as well like an impression on, oh wow, what is possible, And when I remember,
Yeah.
I was first drawn to yoga as well by like a lot of people I talked to, from seeing somebody doing like an amazing asana practice. I was like, wow, I can't do this. I will never be able to do this, but I want to do this. And then, the hook got, and yeah, I think this is like a good kind of mindset. So it's
Yeah.
always possible to start it.
I think that's a very important thing as well, is like you can create the space, but at the end of the day, is really subjective. It's completely mindset. And the way, when I came to yoga, I was, obsessing. And when I say obsessing, I mean like if I wasn't working, I was watching videos of like, Dylan Werner, Patrick Beach, all those kind of Daniel Rama of like what they were doing and just being like, what is going on? Do that. But it was, a thing of like, fuck, I want to do this. Like, how do I do this? And even, I would love it walking into a room and just being like, I'll never forget walking into the first time I walked into a teacher here in London called Stuart Gilchrist class, where it was like 60 people, Tuesday, 10 a.m., and 50% of the rooms in a handstand. Into my first few years of practicing, just like, what is going on? This is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But then some people walk into that environment and be like, what am I doing here? I can't do any of this. And there's a very good book called Mindset, and I think it's by Carol Dweck. And it's about mindset growth, fixed versus growth mindset. And we're always at varying degrees. I will admit, and I've used this example 100 times, it's like my mindset towards learning a language, I'm like, I can't do it. I don't get it. I'm really bad at learning languages, but I know I can change my attitude towards it. But
Mm-hmm.
coming to yoga, I was like, well, fuck it. If they can do it, I can do it. And it's always been my attitude, whether it's teaching or skill-based or practicing. It's like, okay, it's a skill. Like, I can learn this. If somebody can do this, I can do it. And I think there are certain genetic limitations, don't get me wrong, but you can still do a front split. You might not have 4 bricks underneath your foot, but you might have your hips just a bit off the ground. It's still a front split, right? And it's, all you can do is create encouragement, and then people will receive that in the way that they will. And other times you also got to realize that somebody's maybe just having like a shitty day, and you're the last straw that you get underneath. I don't know, I've been teaching since 2019, so not too long, but like definitely, it's even being based here and traveling around and running trainings and retreats. It's like those problems that we think we can be so alone in facing. It's like I still face, regularly. And there's times you can walk into the room and you're just like, I don't know what is happening today. Like,
Thanks for
it's
sharing
just,
that, brother. That's really great. It's quite funny because I was like, I have like a few friends in London teaching or like coming from London, and all of them are like, yeah, if you want to teach in London, everything is like super crazy. Everybody is into rocket. Everybody is doing handstand.
Yeah.
But I totally get your point. It's more about like creating this kind of space as a teacher. It doesn't matter if you're in a private class, if you're in a group class, or if you maybe host like your teacher training or like kind of retreat. You just create the space. What the person who is like receiving is taking out of that is sometimes under your control, and like kind of what you're attracting, what kind of people with what kind of like mindset you're attracting. But on the other hand, like you said, sometimes it's just like a shitty fucking day, and sometimes it's, for some people you're the right teacher and for some are not, and that's also absolutely fine. You can't teach anyone.
Yeah. I think I don't know, there's a big speak of like inclusivity in the yoga world at the moment and stuff like that. And inclusivity by all means, but I also do believe in different levels. Like a beginner is a beginner, an intermediate is an intermediate, an advanced practitioner is an advanced practitioner. And I notice this thing of like catering to everyone, and I do somewhat believe that if you cater to everyone, you cater to no one, because you can't actually serve anyone.
That's a good one.
And it's like, you can have a mixed levels class, don't get me wrong, and that can be super fun, but on one side, the beginners kind of get a little bit out of it, but the advanced people that don't get a bit out of it. I was chatting with a friend the other week about London used to have a little bit of advanced teachers practices, which it doesn't have anymore. And if you get to a certain point within your practice, you somewhat can just get left alone, right? Because it's like, oh, you know what you're doing, da da da. And I think to be inclusive is to both have places that everyone can come to, and equally to have segregations, like to have level 2 advanced classes, to have intermediate classes. And I think it's just a powerful thing. And there's spaces for individuals to go to seek out certain things. And equally to have places where you can all come together and it's just a laugh and a fun practice, right? But there's a lot, I feel, of yoga has to be accessible for everyone. And on a macro picture, 100%, yes. And then equally understanding that if you're struggling with sun salutations, level 2 power vinyasa class maybe is not the place for you to be. But this is why there's vinyasa and dynamic, and also seeking out perhaps private tutoring or whatever that might be. It's not a black and white conversation, but a gray area, because it's like you have certain viewpoints of like, well, everybody should be able to come. And it's like, well, yes and no, because it's like you need to have an advanced handstand class, and then a beginner's handstand class. And then you can have a mixed levels, but in a mixed levels, it's like, it's always interesting, say, like teaching handstand classes, because I teach one on a Monday night, and it's like there's 2 or 3 students that freestanding handstand. And then every now and then you get people that it's like they've never kicked up to the wall, which is fine. It's a mixed level class. But as a teacher, you're kind of like twisting sideways, juggling a few things, But I don't think with that as well, there's ever a solution or right or wrong, because at the end of the day, people will go to where they want to go.
Yeah. In the end, everybody's choosing who he wants to attend, right?
Exactly. And one thing I loved with like Rocket when I first came, like Larry's teaching was get everyone in the same room. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Someone's going to be in a handstand. Someone's going to be in a child's pose. And that's what I mean. It's like, sure, come to this class, see what happens, have a laugh with it, challenge yourself. And some people will walk away being going, that was fucking wild. I want to do all of that. And others will be like, okay, that's horrible. Not for me. I think there's always something for everyone.
Yeah, I think maybe because I was thinking about another point. So I think we are on the same page for this one, definitely. Just to finish my thought, it's for sure even a thing of like my sense of bringing a sense of awareness, even as a teacher, to a class, and being able to like give the person like the right kind of intention. If you have a mixed level class and you're teaching, and like you said, you have a total beginner and you have an like advanced practitioner, they need like totally different kind of support, and they need totally different kind of like practices. And I think even so, being inclusive, like I think in Germany, it's like a kind of other way around. Or at least what I see a lot is like a lot of like super relaxed yoga, like a lot of yin yoga, a lot of like harder, really slow flow classes. And so basically, if you're trying to push these people directly into like an advanced or intermediate class, I don't think that they will feel like super good with that. And that's fine. I think it's, again, not black or white. It's about like creating a space for the right people. And, for everyone who joins, you have to be the best teacher you can. And this is an important part.
And that's it. It's like at the end of the day, all you can do is your best. And if you're showing up like with pure intention and the best heart to support someone, then that's all you can really do. And equally within that, honoring what you can give to people on certain days, because it's like, I see it a lot where teachers, it's like they're burnt out because it's like, I'm going to give and give and give. And it's like, yeah, and you also need to, respect your energy. And Some days for me teaching, I'm adjusting everyone. Other days it's like I can't absorb anyone's energy. But with like managing levels and all of that, it's like if you show up with the best intention to support everyone, I think there's genuine authenticity in that. People will see that and respect that, absorb that, versus if you're just kind of like ignoring. And if I've seen it where you can like you have a beginner in the class and they're a bit like deer in headlights, and all it takes is going up and being like, hey, look, don't worry, we'll work it with this way, try this. And
Good job.
It's kind of like not holding their hand, but that assurance of like, don't worry, you got this. Because the thing is, if a beginner walks into a class like that, 9 times out of 10, especially in the early days, they're going to generally feel like an idiot. They're like, holy shit, where am I? I haven't walked into this, and it's making them not feel insecure about the decision that they have made, and that it's totally fine. And, it's like if my partner, she teaches a little bit of spin. The first time I went to her spin class, I was like, I'm so depth. I have no coordination here. I feel like,
out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm like 6'2" on a tiny little bike, and like you have these girls that are just like pedaling their way, and you're like, all right, whatever. I just got to roll with it, And I think when you let go as the practitioner of the kind of top level ego of like everything needs to be good, you can just laugh at yourself and have fun with it. And I love kind of bringing that energy to classes. Like if a student falls over, it's like, let's have a laugh about it. Like, it happens. And I think that's a really powerful tool as well. And for teachers to show their humanness, and like, I roll out of stuff all the time. Like nothing's perfect, and especially with having an online following, it's like, most of the sessions I do, it's like tantrums. You're frustrated. It's not success. We see such a tiny portion. So it's creating environments where being human, that like error, mistakes is allowed. To fall is powerful versus wrong, because I think so much that we're taught in school is making a mistake is wrong. And yes, if you want to be very technical, making a mistake is wrong. But it's like the process around learning and making mistakes is demonized versus encouraged. And it's like, we should really celebrate. It's like, fuck it, just see what happens. If you fall over, what's the worst? What is the worst thing that's going to happen? Because I guarantee in a yoga room, no one is paying attention to you. It's just like you're there.
That's so powerful. I think that's powerful for yoga practitioners, because I always, when I started this podcast, it was a lot about, breaking up or breaking off a lot of boundaries around yoga. And I don't know about you, but when I first visited my first yoga class, it was like the first male in the whole class, and you feel totally insecure, and you're like, okay. So it was like 8 years ago or something, and nowadays it changed, of course, but there are still people having this kind of boundaries or having this kind of like things holding them back. But on the other hand as well, it's so powerful to remember teachers or beginner teachers, because nowadays a lot of young teachers listening to this podcast, and I'm super happy about this change as well.
Amazing. That's great.
All you share now, I think it's like super, super important to remember this, that you create this space and you have the power to like, again, like making this kind of practice or kind of teaching more human and make it more like accessible for everyone. Because I think even with social media nowadays, at least what I see from my perspective, again, it's a lot about being perfect, because this performs pretty well on social media. If you're not the perfect teacher on Bali, like teaching all the time in front of the rice fields and doing like a scorpion in perfection, it's not perfect, but none of us is perfect, right? And again, it's so much more important, I think, again, as a student as well as like a teacher, to show your students that you are not, or show your teacher as well that you're not perfect, that you're on the way, and that it's like the process. Everybody is in the process, This makes you much more like relatable.
Well, it's hanging out with your students, having conversations with them, showing that you're a person as well. Because it's I feel so often teachers can be placed on a pedestal, and it's
Hmm.
like it's a daunting thing because it's like if you make one little social mistake, it's like, and you saw this kind of with like, say, when there was all the stuff that came out about Patani Joyce, like, it's horrible, like it's completely misuse of power. And
Absolutely.
it's like we can place people so high, it's like he was a guru to people, and it's like, yes, and he was also human that can make some terrible mistakes. As many high profile people do, how it might disrupt the mind or whatever it is. And I think it's when we place people up in a way of that is above us, it can be dangerous, and it's like
Absolutely.
the term guru is, I think, misused in a way now. And it's like you saw the Bikram stuff, and it's just like, just because people get pointed to a certain way of lifestyle doesn't mean they should accept certain things. And it's, I think, especially, now with social media, as you said, it's like, are you even being a yoga teacher unless you're in the rice paddies in Bali and doing all this stuff? And it's like, that was a big area I struggled with for a bit, but it's like, it's just being human. Like life is life, and connect and share your experiences. We all have faults and failures and successes and good things. And I think being able to converse about it and admit our wrongs and celebrate our goods is the best thing.
I think even this is like, like I said, it's as well important not just for every student of like any kind of teacher. Now, we are all students in one degree for one or another, but as well, like as a teacher, to stay like a kind of connected, because I
Mm-hmm.
think this even makes you not just more relatable, but it, again, if you try to be the perfect teacher, you try to serve this image of the guru or the perfect yoga teacher just because it's in your head, or some people,
Yeah.
put you on this kind of pedestal. It's again like an attachment as well, and again,
Yeah,
another way of yoga which is maybe not like suiting you in the long run.
for
That's for sure.
sure. Well, it's like you lose that authenticity of maybe why you're doing it or something, and you can fall into a trap of feeling a persona or perception of you rather than actually being who it is you want to be or your true self. And I think that can so happen with like influences is like, there's the natural things of like, will people still like me? Will they still engage with my content or whatever it is? And that's, at one level, there's many different layers to it. But, we can also hype ourselves up that we have to be a certain way or perform in a certain manner. It's like, I really do believe that the more authentic and human you are within what you offer, the more people will latch onto that, especially when at a time where everything is through a screen, which is incredible with what we get to do.
Yeah.
And equally, it messes so much with our base layer of humanness of like community and interaction. And we end up in fields of comparison. So the more it's like sharing and just being open and honest within the yoga space, within your relationships, whether that's intimate or friendships or family, and it's like the way you interact with the person you buy coffee from is like there's nothing to prove apart from just discovering who you are. And the more you get comfortable, and that's, one of the biggest things yoga has ever taught me is it's like it's an unraveling. Right? You have
Yeah.
to, it's getting comfortable in your skin, which at the end of the day is fucking uncomfortable to do. It's like my therapist or ex-therapist said it to me once, like years ago. And I think it comes from Native American styles. It's like you spend a portion of your life walking up the mountain, and then you hit a point where you've got to walk all the way back down for all that shit that you collected on the way.
Oh, wow.
So it's the same as like we build a personality, and the art of yoga is learning to dissolve the top layers of that to come into our essence. And the beautiful thing about that is that you then get to share that. That's the greatest gift is you get to share yourself with the world in service of whatever that might be.
Man, this was like a real nugget. Thanks for that. Absolutely, yeah, it absolutely matches with the conversation I had the other day with a friend, and I was talking with him, and I turned 30 this year, and
Mm,
always in
stepping
this.
into the 30s.
Yeah, and the typical thoughts before more, let's
Gosh.
say, the social pressure of how do you feel, how will it be,
Mm,
and in the end we both came to the same conclusion that it's not just about like evolving more and more, it's more like you said, unraveling. And
yeah.
every year I feel more and more within myself, and this is because of the practice for sure. Like you said, it can be so fucking scary to really like going into the depth with not just yourself, but having this open kind of conversations with others and being
Mm,
that honest and like letting go of stuff because you think you have to impress somebody, because you think you have to be like this person to be liked. It's
yeah.
it's like a real time challenge, I think, for all of us, and even in this world where we are now more and more on the phones and everything is more about like the impression.
Yeah.
It's can be super terrifying.
And it's also everything. And it's like, I feel in some ways we're so in a transactional society, right? Like everyone's trying to get something rather than actually give something. And I think that plays into the mind a bit, that it's always, the more you shed, it's like the more you have to give. And I really like that it feeds into, that Shiva and Shakti of destruction and creation. It's like you have to destroy yourself to create, and you have to create and destroy. It's channeling those energies because, if the mind is full of stuff, if your life is still full of stuff, life is heavy. You can't move. But when you empty it and when you empty your belongings, it's like you're free. You can actually interact with yourself and the world, I think. And, going to, every like turning 30, everyone's like, you're supposed to have your shit together or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm turning, what am I turning this year? 32.
That's a good sign.
Turning,
If you don't know that, that's a good
it's like,
sign. You're
am I
free from
turning
that.
33 or 32? But it's, you step into certain ages and it's like stuff shifts as well. Your whole life changes, and we're in a society where it's like you're committed to this path and you have to do this and figure that out. I see it now with like younger generations of like have your first million by 21, and it's like, dude, go out and see the world. Like fuck up, like explore whatever it is you need to do to like be a young man or be a young woman and figure it out. Like, I am so happy I went through life of like doing dumb and fun shit when I was in my early 20s, because now it's like, oh yeah, I lived it, you can see it. And then it is like, it's just constant unpacking and unpacking and questioning. And the interesting thing I find is like the more conscious and aware you become, it's beautiful, and then also like, Jesus Christ, what is going on? It's this
I know.
twofold thing of like you release and then like, who am I? What is this body? What is this person? What is my life? And then you also get to create from that, which is super cool.
These are
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's a perfect conclusion, man. Thank you so much
No,
for this
thank you,
conversation.
Marvin. I appreciate the time and the conversation. It's been good.
Yeah, it was like flowing like that. So, yeah, thank you so much, Miles. Obviously, I will link
Good,
everything
dude.
below, like your Instagram, your website. If people
Thank
now
you.
want to like get in touch with you or would like to join your teacher trainings or your classes, how can they reach out to you best way?
So best ways, you can reach out to me on Instagram. I'm getting better at promoting stuff through it. Otherwise, my
Even like a
website,
hard challenge.
I go through phases, but website generally has all my events on there. The newsletter is the most reliable place where that's also every week I send out educational content, and as well as exclusive listings to upcoming trainings and workshops and all the good stuff.
It's great. Miles, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank
Bye.
you, Marvin. Appreciate it, dude. Have a good one, man.
And we are out again. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for sticking around until here. I really enjoyed this conversation. There was so much in there. I like the connection, and I think we can take some of this advice for sure for your yoga teacher journey or like for your practice as well. So I hope you enjoyed as well. If you did so, please consider to follow the podcast on Spotify or YouTube, on Instagram. Everything helps. And yeah, stay tuned for the next week's episode, the next guest, and see you then. Bye.